What's up, everyone? Tonight we're diving into the past to explore some laws that sound completely ridiculous until you understand the genius behind them. These weren't made by crazy rulers. They were created by societies trying desperately not to collapse. So if you enjoy this kind of content, hit that like button and subscribe. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing our global audience. The ban on certain colors. In multiple ancient civilizations, wearing specific colors wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a legal matter. Take purple in Rome or yellow in ancient China. These weren't arbitrary restrictions. They were survival mechanisms disguised as dress codes. The reasoning was brutally practical. These colors required resources that most people would never possess. Purple dye came from sea snails harvested in staggering quantities. Yellow in China required complex processes and rare materials. Wearing these colors broadcasted wealth and power so loudly that it eliminated confusion about who held authority. But there's a darker logic at work. If everyone could wear these colors, wealthy families would compete themselves into bankruptcy, trying to outshine each other at every gathering. When rich people compete aggressively, societies fracture. Ancient leaders understood that status wars didn't end with clothing. They ended with actual wars. By restricting certain colors, governments prevented financial arms races among elites. It kept power visible and predictable. You didn't need to ask who commanded the room. You simply looked at what they wore. No confusion meant fewer conflicts. Fewer conflicts meant the empire lasted another generation. Limitations on public mourning. Here's one that sounds heartless. Ancient societies, particularly Rome and Greece, placed strict limits on how loudly and dramatically people could grieve in public. Professional mourners existed, but even they faced regulations on volume, duration, and theatricality. This wasn't cruelty. It was crowd control. Ancient cities were powder kegs of tension. When one person wailed loudly, others joined. When crowds gathered around public grief, emotions spread like disease. Grief became anger. Anger became accusation. Accusations became riots. Suddenly, a funeral transformed into political chaos. Women faced particularly harsh restrictions on public mourning, not because societies hated women, but because dramatic displays attracted crowds, and crowds attracted instability. Cities couldn't afford to let every death become a public spectacle that might ignite existing tensions. There was also economic reasoning. Wealthy families could afford elaborate mourning rituals. Poor families couldn't. If grief became competitive, louder cries, bigger processions, more dramatic performances, funerals would turn into status contests. And when elites compete publicly over who can grieve harder, resentment builds among those who can't afford to participate. So mourning was rationed. Not because ancient people lacked empathy, but because they understood something we're still learning. Uncontrolled public emotion doesn't stay personal. It turns political, and political emotion can destabilize faster than any enemy army. Sumptuary laws on food and banquets. Ancient Rome passed laws controlling how much food you could serve at your own dinner party. They regulated the number of guests, the types of dishes, and even specific ingredients. This sounds insane until you realize what was happening. The elite Romans were bankrupting themselves through competitive feasting. Bigger banquets, rarer foods, more imported delicacies. Each dinner became a silent battle to prove superiority. And when powerful men bankrupted themselves, they recovered through corruption, bribery, and destabilizing the government. Rome had seen this pattern destroy republics before, so they intervened with sumptuary laws. You could host dinner, but it had to be reasonable. There were limits on meat, luxury items, and extravagance. Yes, Rome literally told people to calm down with the exotic foods. This wasn't about protecting the poor from envy. It was about protecting the state from elite stupidity. When powerful families compete socially, alliances fracture. Politics becomes toxic. The fastest way to destroy a republic is letting elites spiral into status addiction. Of course, Romans hated these laws. They found loopholes. They reclassified foods. They hosted technically legal dinners that absolutely violated the spirit of the law. Rome passed new regulations.
The cycle continued for centuries, but the intent never changed. Stop turning dinner into a political arms race. Rome preferred boring meals to civil war. Paternal authority over adult children. Roman fathers held extraordinary legal power over their households, including adult sons who were married with their own children. This sounds dystopian until you understand the reasoning.
Rome viewed the family as a miniature state. Every state needs one clear authority figure whose word ends arguments immediately. Efficiency always trumped feelings. In a world without constant police presence, without social safety nets, without bureaucratic oversight, households had to regulate themselves. The father's power ensured responsibility flowed upward. If something went wrong, debt, crime, scandal, Rome knew exactly who to blame. Accountability mattered more than fairness. But here's what people miss. With power came obligation. The father was legally responsible for everyone under his roof. Their debts, their crimes, their survival. If your household collapsed, Rome didn't accept excuses. You failed as a leader. This system discouraged rebellion inside homes. It forced unity. It made families stable economic units rather than emotional democracies. Rome wasn't trying to build happy households. It was trying to build predictable ones. Over time, this power softened. Abuse became frowned upon. Social pressure mattered. But the legal structure remained because it worked. Roman households produced soldiers, workers, heirs, and taxpayers reliably, which is all the state wanted. Public toilet regulations. Ancient Rome had communal public toilets with no privacy whatsoever. Long stone benches with holes, everyone sitting side by side. And yes, Rome regulated behavior inside them. This wasn't failure, it was Roman efficiency. Public latrines weren't casual hangout spots. They were regulated spaces because sanitation in a city of over 1 million people was survival. Disease didn't knock politely. It moved in aggressively. So Rome treated bathroom behavior as public health policy. There were expectations. Don't linger too long. Don't splash. Don't cause scenes. Conversation was allowed, but not theatrics. Rome wanted order, not commentary. One infamous feature was the shared cleaning sponge on a stick, rinsed in salt water between uses. Before you recoil, understand that germ theory didn't exist. Salt water seemed hygienic enough. After a few months in ancient Rome, your standards adjusted dramatically. Rules prevented chaos. If people fought over seats, lingered excessively, or turned latrines into social clubs, congestion happened. Congestion led to filth. Filth led to disease. Disease led to panic. Rome did not enjoy panic. There was also social value. Latrines reinforced temporary equality. Rich and poor sat side by side. Senators and shopkeepers shared the same bench. Rome liked this. It reminded citizens that despite hierarchy, everyone participated in the same systems. And yes, even waste was regulated. Human waste was valuable, used in tanning, cleaning clothes, and agriculture. Stealing waste from latrines could get you fined. Rome did not waste. Nighttime movement restrictions. In ancient Rome, walking around at night made you suspicious by default. Patrols watched streets. Guards questioned people. If you were out late without good reason, Rome assumed you were planning something illegal or already doing it. This wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Most fires started at night. Most thefts happened at night. Most assassinations and secret meetings happened at night when witnesses were scarce. Rome responded by discouraging nighttime movement altogether. If you had to be out, you needed a reason. Work, emergency, official business. Just going for a walk was not a valid excuse. Night watchmen carried authority, and resisting them was a terrible idea. Rome preferred inconveniencing innocent people rather than allowing criminals freedom. This was a recurring theme. There was also fire risk. Rome burned frequently and catastrophically. Limiting nighttime movement reduced accidental fires and made it easier to identify who was responsible when one inevitably happened. Even elites weren't immune.
Senators moved with escorts. Wealthy citizens stayed indoors. Darkness equalized everyone, and Rome hated uncertainty. To modern people, this feels oppressive. To Romans, it felt logical. The city was too big, too crowded, too volatile to trust darkness. Night was unpredictable, and unpredictability was Rome's greatest enemy. Required approval for suicide. Here's one that surprises people. In ancient Rome, suicide wasn't automatically illegal. What was illegal was dying without filing appropriate paperwork first. If a Roman citizen wished to end their life, they were expected to submit a formal request explaining why. Illness, irreversible disgrace, terminal suffering, loss of honor, these were acceptable reasons. "I had a bad week" was not. To modern ears, this sounds cruel. To Rome, it was administrative common sense. Every citizen existed inside a web of obligations. Families depended on them. Debts were tied to them. Inheritances flowed through them. If someone died suddenly, especially by their own hand, legal chaos followed.
By forcing people to explain themselves, the state filtered impulsive decisions from irreversible ones. Many petitions were denied, not because Rome wanted people to suffer, but because humans make terrible choices when overwhelmed. Requiring approval added delay. Delay added reflection. Reflection saved lives. There was also legal incentive. If someone committed suicide without approval, their property could be confiscated. Families lost inheritance. Rome made it clear. Dying irresponsibly was financially rude. On the other hand, approved suicides were handled with dignity. Property was protected. Families were spared legal punishment. Society acknowledged the decision as tragic but orderly. There was darker motivation too. Rome relied on citizens, soldiers, taxpayers, administrators. Letting people remove themselves freely weakened the system. A state allowing unrestricted self-destruction was, in Rome's eyes, slowly bleeding itself out. Women's clothing and jewelry restrictions. Roman law placed strict limits on women's clothing, jewelry, and visible wealth. How much gold you could wear, how elaborate your garments could be, how much sparkle was acceptable before society asked uncomfortable questions. Rome counted all of it. This sounds like moral panic. To Rome, it was damage control. Roman elites had a problem: status competition. Women's fashion became one of the fastest escalation points. Expensive jewelry and imported fabrics turned gatherings into silent wealth battles. One necklace invited a larger necklace. One gown demanded a more outrageous gown. Rome watched this and thought, this is how republics die. So the state intervened by restricting visible luxury, trying to slow the arms race. These laws weren't about modesty in a modern sense. They were about preventing elite families from bankrupting themselves, trying to look superior at dinner parties. Rome had seen enough politicians ruin their finances and mysteriously recover through corruption. There was also social clarity. Rome relied heavily on visual hierarchy. Clothing signaled marital status, social rank, moral expectations. A married woman dressed modestly was seen as stable and respectable. Excessive display suggested independence, and independence made Rome nervous. Jewelry limits also protected families economically. Gold worn in public was walking wealth. Theft, envy, and resentment followed. Rome preferred wealth stay discreet and taxable. Naturally, Roman women hated these laws. They bent them creatively. They found loopholes. They layered jewelry in clever ways. Men complained, then quietly admired the results. Lawmakers passed new restrictions. Everyone ignored them again. But the intent never changed. Rome wasn't trying to erase women from public life. It was trying to keep status competition from turning social life into financial blood sport. The dishonor status of gladiators. Despite their fame, gladiators were legally classified as infames, dishonorable persons. They couldn't vote. They couldn't hold office. Their testimony in court was limited. Legally, they were closer to criminals than celebrities. This seems confusing until you remember Rome hated mixed signals.
Gladiators were violent by profession. They killed or were killed for entertainment. Rome understood the danger of glorifying that too much. If people started seeing gladiators as heroes rather than performers, you risked normalizing violence outside the arena. Rome preferred its violence organized, scheduled, and ticketed. The dishonor status served as a psychological firewall. Yes, you could admire their skill. Yes, you could cheer. But no, you couldn't aspire to be them in any socially respectable way. Rome wanted admiration without imitation. There was also class concern. Gladiators often came from enslaved people, prisoners, or the poor. If successful fighters gained full honor, social mobility would accelerate unpredictably. Rome was many things, but flexible about hierarchy was not one of them. Even free men who volunteered to become gladiators were legally degraded. By stepping into the arena, they agreed to lose status. Rome made sure this choice came with consequences. You could gain money, fame, and attention, but you would lose dignity in the eyes of the law. No refunds. This prevented ambitious young men from abandoning military or civic careers to chase arena glory. Rome needed soldiers and administrators more than influencers with swords. The contradiction remained. Romans loved gladiators. They fantasized about them. They gossiped about them. Some even collected their sweat as cosmetics. Yes, really. Rome simply refused to let that admiration translate into power. Rome understood something uncomfortable. If you reward spectacle with status, spectacle eventually replaces governance. And Rome was not about to let someone with a helmet run the state.
Conclusion. If there's one idea that truly defines these ancient laws, it's this. Nothing was ever just private. Not your clothes, not your family, not your grief, not even your death. Ancient societies believed personal behavior didn't stay personal for long. It leaked, spread, and eventually became a public problem. So they intervened early. From their perspective, the state wasn't something existing out there. It was everywhere, in households, in rituals, in daily habits. The logic was relentless. If enough individuals made bad choices, society collapsed. And these civilizations had seen collapse enough times to become deeply allergic to it. This is why they regulated morality, behavior, and routine. Not because they wanted to micromanage joy, but because they saw patterns. Private excess led to public debt. Private scandals led to feuds. Feuds led to violence. Violence led to instability. From their perspective, telling people how to behave wasn't tyranny, it was maintenance. They didn't trust individuals to always act in the collective interest, especially when emotions, pride, or desire got involved. And here's the uncomfortable truth. For centuries, it worked. These societies managed enormous populations and constant pressure without modern technology. They held themselves together through systems, discipline, and relentless regulation. People didn't have freedom the way we understand it today, but they had predictability. And predictability kept civilizations running. When we look back at these laws and think, that's insane, we're often missing context. These societies weren't trying to be humane, they were trying to survive. And survival required limits on emotion, behavior, ambition, and sometimes joy. They didn't ask, is this fair? They asked, will this keep everything from falling apart? And for a long time, the answer was yes. That's why ancient laws weren't mistakes. They were warnings, carved in stone by people who understood that civilization is fragile, and sometimes the strangest rules are what keep it from shattering completely. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into ancient logic, let me know what other historical topics you want me to cover. See you next time.